going on, guys? Going to continue with our Unit 2 review. Before I do that, just wanted to update you on the election. A lot of you reached out to me already, but Bernie Sanders officially dropped out of the race for president yesterday. So we officially have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Makes sense, in my opinion. A lot of you might be a little confused. Big Bernie supporters, I saw in your projects, a lot of you thought Bernie was going to win the primaries. He had an uphill battle. He's a senator. I think he was trying to focus a little bit more on what is going on with the country now with the coronavirus and trying to be able to participate in making legislation. There were some unsafe conditions for people voting in primaries, so I think he took the high road, kind of ducked out where he did, to focus a little bit more on doing his job and allowing Joe Biden to just kind of step up and be the nominee for the Democrats. So picking up where we left off yesterday. So yesterday we finished talking about the bully pulpit and kind of how the power of the president has grown. Sticking with the executive branch today, we're going to talk about the bureaucracy, which is kind of that scary word. The bureaucracy is part of the executive branch, but a lot of people think the bureaucracy has so much power that it almost has become its own branch, a fourth branch of government. So if you see big idea 3 right here, it says the federal bureaucracy is a powerful institution implementing federal policies with sometimes questionable accountability. A bureaucracy itself is basically when state officials or appointed officials are making a lot of decisions that are very, very important rather than the elected officials. So let's think about it this way. Excuse me. The Department of Education. We have the people making decisions about your education who are not elected by you. Betsy DeVos is the education secretary for the United States. She was appointed by Donald Trump, and she gets to kind of push a lot of the different things that we see in education rather than people who are elected to do so. So that's just one of many examples here. But we get into the bureaucracy. Some of the big things that you need to know that the bureaucracy runs on a system of either patronage or merit. Patronage is basically this idea of you supported me throughout my candidacy. I'm glad that you did. So now I'm going to kind of reward you for your support with this job in the government. So for example, you might remember Ben Carson's, might be a little too young to remember, he actually ran against Donald Trump in 2016. He's a brain surgeon. He basically dropped out of the race through his support behind Donald Trump when a lot of other people were not, and Trump rewarded him with a job in his cabinet. This idea of patronage was actually really started last year. You might have talked about it in U.S. history, I'm sure, with the spoil system with Andrew Jackson. This idea, hey, I'm going to give you this job because you supported me. Thank you. I appreciate it. Whereas the other part of the bureaucracy, when these jobs come from merit, which is just simple, basically, if somebody deserves a job, if they are qualified for the job, we're going to give you that job based on your ability rather than whatever political connections that you might have. So if I was to become president, I don't know anything about agriculture, let's say. I'm going to look and see who like the leading researchers are in the fields of agriculture, and then I might choose that person to head up the Department of Agriculture based on their merit. Okay. So the bureaucracy is really centering on those two ideas, those two terms. The other thing that we can talk about when we talk about the bureaucracy is this idea of civil service. You might remember in Global One talking about Confucianism and civil service exams. It's basically this idea that the government is hiring and promoting people based on merit principles. Sometimes with civil service, you're going to have to take a test to qualify for your position, and that's actually going to be what actually gets you the job. So that civil service exam that you might have heard of, right? We hear about that for government offices. My dad is the director of child protection for the county. That's a civil service job. You have to take tests to get that job. If you want a promotion, you take a test to get promoted. You see it with police departments, state troopers, things like that too, okay? So all throughout different levels of the government. With the bureaucracy and kind of its relationship with the government, there's a term that's really, really important for you to know for your AP exam called power of the purse. And it's really easy. We've talked about it briefly before when we were talking about the iron triangle, which I'll talk about again in a couple minutes. Ladies, easy for you, right? You have your purse, your wallet's probably in your purse. That's where you keep your money, right? So if you have control over the money, that comes with a lot of power, right? More money, more power is kind of something that we hear throughout history. So legislators get to influence public policy because of their power to vote on money for public purposes. So if you're part of the bureaucracy, let's say again, let's just take Department of Agriculture because I was talking about it before. I might have to smooth up to some legislators because I know that they're going to control my budget and I need the most money that I can get from them. Okay. So when you hear power of the purse, just think influence that comes over policy because you control the money if you're a legislator. And the last kind of vocab term for the bureaucracy that you need to know, compliance monitoring, really simple, just quality assurance. Any business does it, right? The bureaucracy sort of runs like a business. Government does the same thing that any other business does, where they're going to basically do testing to make sure that the day-to-day activities of the bureaucracy are being carried out in the best way possible, that they're doing what they need to be doing, they're doing it effectively, they're not wasting people's money or time. Okay. So what does the bureaucracy actually do? If it's so powerful, if some people consider it the fourth branch of the government, what the heck do they actually do that gives them that special sort of status in government? So some of the jobs or tasks performed by these departments, agencies, and commissions in the bureaucracy would be things like writing and enforcing regulations, issuing fines, testifying before Congress, things like that. So simply right now, if you said Betsy DeVos before Congress and you just hit search in YouTube, you're going to see tons and tons of videos where she's going to go in front of Congress and answer questions about what's going on in education. They might force different regulations about standardized testing, things like that. How they're going to provide funding, what kind of funding they might provide to the states for education, just as one example. The bureaucracy can also kind of cover issuing of fines. And you might think that this is a little bit weird, like who are they fining? What are they fining? Um, if let's say that somebody's not in compliance, so it says, according to the Department of Agriculture, just sticking with that, that, no state's supposed to use more than this X amount of fertilizer, and we find out that these people are, they can actually fine those states or fine those individual corporations and things like that until they get into compliance and they can collect those fines. But the big one down here that I want to focus on the most, something that we struggle with a little bit in class, is the iron triangle. So I have the iron triangle right here. Remember that the iron triangle is basically the term given to the relationship between interest groups, Congress, and the bureaucracy. Interest groups, think the NRA, the NAACP, AARP, right? Those groups we talked about in class. What are they doing? They have a certain vision, something that they want to push for, something that they're fighting for, right? The NRA, their main focus is Second Amendment rights, guns, right? So they're going to basically back different candidates in Congress with electoral support. Hey, you have the support of all of our members in the NRA. We're going to vote for you. We're going to make sure you stay in office. And because they do that, Congress is going to help them by providing funding and kind of push the bureaucracy, those agencies in the bureaucracy, to push for things that the NRA might support. Okay. And the bureaucracy, they're going to possibly put in less regulations on guns. Maybe they push a special favor through. The NRA really wants to get a specific type of ammunition legalized or a magazine, something like that. Sure, we're going to give it to them. That's great. And it's kind of just this relationship that works. And the bureaucracy makes the whole thing run. Okay. If it's not for the bureaucracy, we don't necessarily see those regulations because the bureaucracy, being in the executive department, has influence over how different things are going to be enforced. Okay, so just keep that in mind when we talk about the iron triangle, but it's mutually beneficial. Congress, the interest group, and the bureaucracy are all supposed to benefit from these networks in the iron triangle. Okay, all right. Try to keep this video somewhat short today. Some of the different agencies in the bureaucracy that have come up on the AP exam before, I included them on here. You're not necessarily going to need to know all of them in detail, but to have a general idea of what they do could be a big sort of thing that you might need to know. I even included a recent example over the past couple of years of something that these people have done in these different agencies. So the Department of Homeland Security, making sure that we're safe and secure, the fight against terrorism, potential threats. Trump's border policies would fall under the Department of Homeland Security. Veterans Affairs, education I've been talking about, the Environmental Protection Agency. This, and sometimes too, the bureaucracy can talk about the power of the purse. Trump requesting budget reductions. Trump's actually cut things to the Environmental Protection Agency. Federal Elections Commissions, the bureaucracy runs different things with state elections and kind of sets mandates on how they want these elections to be run. Securities and Exchange Commission, regulating stock exchanges and things like that, and making sure that the stock market is running as freely as possible. So some things to keep in mind with the bureaucracy when we talk about it. And last couple things for this unit, and then I'll let you guys go. When we talk about the bureaucracy and we talk about kind of that lack of oversight and that they kind of have sometimes questionable oversight, the only real oversight that we see on the bureaucracy in terms of like checks on their power would be committee hearings and the power of the purse. So really the only thing that Congress can do is call people in for investigations. So basically, you want you to testify in front of Congress, asking questions. Hey, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Is this a good idea? Try to get that out in the public and try to get the public to influence that certain agency to do something differently. And then other than that is just appropriations, money. Because Congress controls the money, you can say they have a little bit of a check on the power of those bureaucratic agencies because they can cut their funding. But overall, in terms of really stopping them from doing certain things or regulating their activity, there's very little oversight on the bureaucracy compared to some of the other things that we might see in the system of checks and balances in terms of regulating the powers of the president, Congress, the Supreme Court, things like that in checks and balances. All right. Um, last but not least, down here, just really quickly, the goal is for the government to hold the bureaucracy accountable because we talk about that. It's kind of limited. But I listed some formal and informal powers of each branch of government that they can have that can influence the bureaucracy in the hope of keeping the bureaucracy accountable. So obviously Congress, these are all kind of common sense legislation, overriding vetoes if the president vetoes something, giving them advice, making treaties, using the media, right? That public influence on those policies in the oversight committees. The president himself vetoing things, being commander in chief of the armed forces, can kind of limit some of the power of things like, for example, the Department of Homeland Security that we were just talking about. The courts, basically, judicial review is implied, right, in the Constitution. So we call it a formal power, but it's sort of still informal because it's not in the Constitution. But they also can kind of accept cases and hear about whether or not something that the bureaucracy is doing is constitutional or unconstitutional. So when you talk about limits on the power of the bureaucracy, really only these things. You can see it's a little bit faulty. It's not a perfect science. Okay, so we'll stop the video there for today. Finish up Unit 2. We'll do Unit 3 over the next few weeks. If you haven't yet, please let me know about your access to a laptop or computer, and if you have Wi-Fi at home so we can help you guys out for the exam. All right, have a good night, guys. Take care.